Did we do this?
You're on the 2012.
12 primary season? Okay. This all set up. So, national conventions are kind of the middle step of the year of a presidential election, so they happen this summer. The delegates are from each of the states, and the convention is about a 4-day long process. The first day is a lot of speech making, a lot of introduction activities. They work on the platform of the party, things like that. The second day is a lot of committee reports. You know, it's a big, massive meeting, so they have to go and, you know, report out how they're doing financially, how they're, you know, what their goals are for the next year, things like that. The third day is then presidential balloting. It's where the delegates will say, you know, the state of Wisconsin goes to blah, 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 blah for the candidate of that party. And then the fourth day is usually vice president and then final speeches. Sometimes the fifth day is sort of like a breakout session. Lots of press will go and talk to all of the candidates, and there'll be like this big announcement thing, and it's kind of a big party. And then it's on to the general election. It'll happen in November of this year. And what we're really going to be looking at, or at least the candidates will be looking at, are battleground states. Some of the battleground states that we have are Florida, Ohio, and Wisconsin. There are a few others in there, but what we consider a battleground state is a state that isn't traditionally going to one party, that they've been switching back and forth for a number of years. It means that the state might be up for grabs as far as switching things, and those are important. The states that traditionally vote for, you know, a party, the minority party isn't going to spend a ton of time in those states because they're not going to go and spend money on an election that they're probably going to lose in the regards to the electoral college system. Okay, so we're going to switch a little bit from campaigns and elections and things like that and move a little bit into voting tendencies. Political scientists spend sometimes their entire careers simply studying this concept in government. How do we vote? Why do we vote? Why don't we vote? What can we do to make voting more popular? How do we encourage groups, age groups like yourselves, this 18 to 24 range? How do we encourage you to go and vote? What are some of the things that you need in order to become a better voter? Things like that. We are traditionally, historically, at about a 50% voter turnout rate. So about half of our eligible population goes out to vote. And so, you know, those political scientists are looking at that other 50% and thinking, okay, what do we do to get those people to go out and vote? The effect of low voter turnout. So why do we care so much about voter turnout? We care because it does have a serious effect on the outcomes of elections. And we really want to know what causes low voter turnout. The two main things are apathy, this idea of it doesn't matter, my vote won't matter, I'm just one person in this entire country, what is my vote going to do? The second is cynicism. There's a constant, or there's a growing negativity in the world of government, this gridlock, the idea that government can't work well together, that causes some people to sort of throw their hands up and say, you know what, I'm just not going to participate because it just isn't something that I'm interested in anymore. So the question of, is voter turnout declining? Yes. It's not declining at a dramatic level, but it's not growing. And that's one of the bigger concerns that we have, is how do we grow voter turnout as opposed to lose voter turnout? What are some of the things that we need to do? And there's been a lot of discussion in the last few years, especially around your age group. What are some of the things that we could be doing to sort of invite people in that 18 to 24 range to be better voters or to get out and vote? One of the things that people kind of, you know, question is technology. Can we use technology to make voting more accessible to people like you who use technology every single day? The problem with that is that when you use technology, there's always room for someone to skew votes. And so really the best way right now is paper. And so that's kind of old-fashioned in your world, and for a lot of you, when you get to November and are eligible to vote, you may choose not to for a number of reasons, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So this is voter turnout for presidential and congressional elections. We also call congressional elections midterm elections. It's the midterm of the president. So that's kind of in the middle of the presidential election. It's for Congress, all House of Representatives members and a third of the Senate. So you can see like those are always lower. They're just less popular elections. A presidential election has a lot of popularity, so people tend to go out and vote for those. But you will see like in the mid 60s, we had our highest voter turnout. The 80s was pretty low. Early mid 90s was pretty low. And we've been growing a little bit, but at about 2009, we started to see things kind of come down a little bit. So it will be interesting to see what 2016 does as far as if people will go out and vote. One of the things that most political scientists are pretty nervous about right now is that this presidential campaign is already very negative. It's already very static, where there's not a lot of change happening. And so they're nervous that that will cause voters not to go out and vote, because by the time you get to November, you're going to be so sick of hearing people bash each other that you might not just want to participate at all. So factors for influencing who votes. Now, please be careful here, because we went through each of these when we talked about how they vote. This is just who votes based on these factors. So we're not looking at are they voting Democrat or Republican or third party. We're just looking at are they voting. When it comes to age, the highest voter turnout age group is retired. About 65 to 74 are the highest voter turnout rates there. This is because these people tend to not have jobs, so they're able to go and vote during the day. They also have a lot of interest in what government does, because they are on lots of them are on government assistance. So Social Security is providing them some retirement funding, Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. So they're really interested in what government's doing, because it will have a dramatic effect on their daily life. The lowest is your age group, and my age group, 18 to 25. Tends to not vote as much. Part of that is because it's not technically like popular. It's not something that people do a lot. Sometimes you're off at school, you've got other things going on in your life. You don't necessarily see government affecting you on a daily basis, and so it doesn't seem so important. Educational attainment. We know that the more degrees you receive, the more apt you are to go and vote. So part of that's because when you have a higher education, you know how to investigate, you know how to critically analyze things, and so you tend to do that with the candidates. And the more people that do that, the more likely they are to vote. If you're educated on the candidates, you tend to be passionate about what candidate you want, and so you'll go to the polls and vote for that person. Minority status. If you are in a minority, the voter turnout tends to be lower, obviously, than the majority. And part of that is this apathy piece, that minorities tend to feel like government isn't doing a lot for them, and that maybe they don't really matter that much, and so they tend not to. Sometimes they don't feel like candidates really understand their needs, and so they don't go and vote. Sometimes they don't speak English as a first language, and so it's very stressful to go and try and vote with an English, ballot, things like that. Income level. If you have a higher income, you are more likely to vote. Part of that is because you have a car to get to the voting place. You have knowledge because you maybe get the paper or have cable or understand some of the candidates. You might have more interest because government is, taxes and things like that will affect you if you have a higher income. You may also have a job that lets you leave work to go and vote. There are a great deal of people who work jobs that wouldn't let them. Lower income jobs tend to not say, yep, you can go for an hour and go and vote. That's not really how it works. Lower income tend not to have a car to get themselves there. They tend not to have the education, understand what the candidates are talking about, or may not feel like it affects them as much. So we do see some disparities there. And then the last piece is two-party competition. We see a higher voter turnout in states where it's more competitive. If your state is sort of a swing state or a battleground state, we see voter turnout higher there. And mostly that's because voters feel like then their vote will count and maybe matter in the long run. Whereas a state that's traditionally going to one party all the time, the other party, that minority party, may not have a lot of votes because they have sort of become apathetic. They're sort of like, okay, every time I go and vote, it never matters because the other party always wins and all my electoral votes go to that other candidate, so I'm just not gonna vote. It doesn't matter. And that can be really hard. Apathy is the hardest thing for candidates to overcome because they can't guarantee that your vote will count or won't count. But even if you feel apathetic, even if you feel like your vote won't count, go and vote. We've seen so many elections where people, where it's come down to simply hundreds of votes, and that really does matter. So make sure that you kind of fight that, because it will guaranteed at some point in your life, you'll look at government and say, this is just too much of a mess. I do not want to get involved in this. But keep doing it, because the only way that you'll get that change is if you go and vote. This is a couple of graphics just to kind of show you, this is by age group. So again, you're seeing that 65 to 74 is the highest voter turnout. 18 to 24 is the lowest. It kind of grows as you get older. Educational level, again, kind of growing as you add more degrees. So why people don't vote? Again, this is a big deal for political scientists. They really want to study why do people, what are some of the causes of why people don't vote? One of them is the uninformative media coverage and often negative campaigning. When you turn on the news, you're often bombarded by, he said this, no I didn't. He wants this, no I don't. The candidates are always speaking to one another and saying things, and the candidates are always like disputing on things. And sometimes it leads you to be like, I don't even know what they stand for, because this guy says they stand for this, and the candidate actually says they don't. And so sometimes that can cause people just not to vote at all. It's too confusing, they don't want to take the time to figure it out. The other thing is negative campaigning. People don't like to look at candidates go after each other. It doesn't make you feel confident that they'll be a good president. And so we tend to see the more negative the campaigns get, the lower the voter turnout becomes, which is a concern for political scientists in this presidential campaign. As far as the uninformative media coverage and sort of this education piece, part of it is that you have to understand we don't really teach you how to choose candidates. Now, I'm going to teach you because it's my personal goal in life. But like, I didn't learn in school how to research candidates and understand what I felt about something and find the candidate that fits most with me. In fact, most of your peers, your generation, isn't going to learn how to do that. What you're going to learn is who gets the most likes, who gets the most tweets, who gets the most attention, who has the most media coverage. Those are the people that your generation is going to vote for. So you have to keep fighting that a little bit. Keep learning about candidates. Research them before you go and vote. Be an informative voter as opposed to just like a reactive voter. That can really make a big difference. The rational ignorance effect is a kind of an effect produced when people purposely and rationally decide not to become informed on an issue because they believe that their vote isn't likely to count. So it's sort of this idea of, oh, I do not want to go and research all of these candidates. My vote isn't even going to count. I'm just not going to go vote. For you guys, it's learning about candidates isn't glamorous. It's not, interesting. It takes time. It takes some attention. It takes kind of some soul searching to sort of figure out what you really believe. And so a lot of people aren't really willing to do that. So as a remedy, there have been a number of ideas kind of drafted to improve voter turnout. And I'm going to give you three. The first is to open polls 3 weeks before Election Day and allow you to go in and vote for a 3-week period. Part of the struggle here is that we have one Election Day. It's on the first Tuesday in November. It's a random day, and sometimes people pass it by, they forget about it, their lives get busy, they're off doing something, they work a job that doesn't let them go during one day. Lots of states have really tried to open their polling centers for a really long amount of time on that day, but in general, it's one day to try and get the whole country to vote. So the idea here is if we opened it 3 weeks ahead of time, you'd be able to go and vote when it was convenient for you. The second idea is to open absentee ballots. If you're traveling, if you are going to be out of town, if you work a job that doesn't let you get to a polling place, you can absentee ballot. What you'll do is you go to your voting center website, you request an absentee ballot, you have to fill out this form. You have to give a reason why you're getting an absentee ballot. They'll send you that ballot in the mail, you'll mark it, and you'll send it back to them. It's an awesome way to do it, but one of the remedies to improve voter turnout is the idea that maybe we could open absentee ballots just to anybody, that you wouldn't really need a reason. Wisconsin does a pretty good job at this. In fact, Kyle, my fiance, which is funny to say, worked at Meritor last year and couldn't get to his voting place, and so he absentee balloted, and they let him do that. They just sent it to him, and he filled it out, and he sent it back, and then he didn't have to worry about figuring it out that day and getting back to our polling place. So Wisconsin does a pretty good job at it, but other states tend to be more restrictive on their absentee ballots, so that would be an improvement. The other one, the third one, which is my favorite one, is the idea of making Election Day a national holiday. This would cause schools to be out of session. It would cause government agencies to be off, so like you wouldn't receive mail that day, but things like that, which would kind of make Election Day more important. Because it isn't, again, it passes people by. They don't always know that it's happening. I mean, if you're not watching the news and into media, you may not even realize that it is Election Day. So sort of making it more important may cause people to see more of the piece there. The counter argument to that is if you don't vote, then we just have a day off for really no good reason. And if you're going to make it a national holiday and not force people to go and vote, will people actually go and vote, or will they go do something and not go to their polling place for that day? So there are kind of both sides of the coin there. Okay, historical restrictions. I'm going to go through this really quickly. In general, when the founders drafted the Constitution, there were a lot of restrictions on voting. Women weren't allowed to vote. African Americans weren't allowed to vote. There was a lot of restrictions. Property was a requirement at the time. They had to own property. That kind of went away pretty quickly. But further extensions of the franchise, the 19th Amendment allowed women to vote. The 15th Amendment. In 1971, we moved the voting age down to 18. It used to be 21. We moved it down to 18. So we've gradually throughout history kind of extended the restrictions on voting, or limited the restrictions on voting, so that more and more people. However, there are still some groups of people who are restricted to voting. So these are people who are non-citizens. You have to show residency, so if you aren't a citizen of this country, you can't vote. Some people argue that we should open that up. People in prison, all prison inmates are not allowed to vote. All convicted felons are not allowed to vote, even after you're released from prison. So if you're sentenced with a felony, you serve your term, and you're back out into society, you can't vote. And the argument here is, are we continuing to punish these people who have, done something wrong, but served the time that they've been sentenced to, are trying to make a better life for themselves, but they're still not really able to have a say in government? So there's something to be said there. And then the mentally incompetent are also restricted. So those who have been admitted into mental facilities, who tend to have pretty severe mental disabilities, are unable to vote. And so, you know, there are some arguments for and against in that situation. There are some current eligibility and registration requirements as far as voting goes. First and foremost is registration. Please understand, especially those of you who are 18 or will be 18 by November, you need to make sure that you register to vote. It's a very simple process. Usually you just go online. If you like Google Dane County voting registration or something like that, you just sort of put in all sorts of information. Some states will do this differently. In North Dakota, you're not required to register, you can just show up. But in all other of the states, you have to register. Some will make you register before you get there. Some allow you to register at the voting site. It's just filling out a sheet of paper. Lots of times you're automatically registered when you renew your license, your driver's license. And one of the new restrictions that we're starting to see come up in a lot more states are these voter ID laws, or what we call photo ID laws. So right now, the qualifications to vote are that you have to be a citizen of the United States, you have to be 18 years old, and you have to prove residency. So when I voted the last time, what you have to do is you have to bring a piece of mail that has your name and the address that you've registered with, and that was it. Now, the state of Wisconsin has changed it so that you have to have a government-issued ID. A passport, a driver's license has to be updated, and it has to have the address in which you currently reside. Now, that's a problem for certain groups of people. First, it's a problem for people who are homeless. They do have a photo ID system for those people that kind of explains what's going on, but those people then have to go to a DMV and get that photo ID. And if you're homeless, odds are probably good that you don't have enough money to get yourself to a DMV to go get a photo ID. We also see your age group will be limited a little bit, because if you go off to college, you're going to be living in a different area. So colleges have been really working to get a system where they would publish everyone a voter ID that they would give you in order to be able to vote where you are residing. Elderly, people who don't have IDs anymore or their IDs expired, getting them to an area. And so voter ID laws have been very controversial because lots of people believe it's really restricting your eligibility to vote. And when we're doing that, we're restricting your civil liberty. And that could be a big problem. So we'll see. As of right now, Wisconsin has passed their voter ID law. It is in appeals court right now, but as of right now, it is in effect. So if you go and vote in the primary in April or you vote in the November election, you should have a government-issued ID with you when you go. Okay, primary elections. Primary elections are ways for states to elect a nominee for the specific parties. And again, that's kind of moved into the national conventions, and then things are decided from there. There are a number of different primaries that we have, and each state gets to choose how they want to run their primary. Some states also use a caucus system, which isn't up on this slide. That's a meeting of people of the party. They go ahead and select the nominee that they want, and then they cast that ballot kind of as a collective group. We have closed primaries and open primaries. A closed primary is where the voter is limited in choosing candidates of the party of which he or she is a member. So you have to be a member of a party. You go and you show that you're a member, and you get that ballot, and then you select those members. It really limits bipartisanship, and it limits the idea that, like, if you're not in a specific party, it's very difficult to vote. An open primary doesn't require you to be a part of a primary, but they tend to have ballots that are divided by primary, or by party, sorry. A blanket primary is where a voter can vote for candidates of more than one party. Most states have a blanket primary. And then a runoff primary is where they actually have two primaries. They'll have an initial primary, and then the top candidates from that will get put on a new ballot, and they'll do another primary. That's not as popular because it's a lot of time, a lot of money, it's pretty expensive. And elections are expensive. States try and make it as efficient as possible so that they can save money. The general election is held on the first Tuesday of November, unless that's the first day of the month, and then they bump it to the next Tuesday, just because it's too quickly in November for people to remember the election.
So for caucuses, are those like citizens voting, or are those a group of people voting? Like, it's not a whole state?
No, well, yeah, it's like groups of, so like Iowa does a caucus system, and so typically it's like, I don't know if they do it by county or by like a sub-district, but like if you want to go, you go and you meet in a room and you basically have this meeting and you decide, you like basically they
So you don't
vote
like
in that
cast a
mini room.
ballot?
Not really, it sort of depends. Lots of them will just like cast mini ballots and then they'll count those ballots and that's what the caucus will go ahead and decide. It's not done as much anymore because it's pretty time. I mean, everyone has to go at a specific time as opposed to any time during the day. So I don't know if there's any other states other than Iowa, maybe, or New Hampshire, maybe. I don't remember. So how are elections conducted? Again, states get to choose how they want to do this, and so it really depends on the state. If you're moving out of state, please make sure that you know what to expect. I should say, I think I can say all. Ballots are published, usually like in the newspaper or online about a week before the election. You actually get to see exactly what the ballot is gonna look like. And if you move to a new state, or even like for your first time voting, I would really encourage you to look at that so that you know what's coming. If you show up and you have no idea what you're doing and you're like kind of like confused, you can make some big mistakes on your ballot where you're voting for someone you don't want to vote for. So take a look at those. Sometimes it's helpful because there are names on there that you don't recognize, so you can do a little research, but they do always publish that for you. So there's an office block, or the Massachusetts ballot, and this is where candidates are grouped in elective office. So it says president, and then it'll say the Democratic candidate, the Republican candidate, the third party candidate, any other candidates that are, and then sometimes there's a blank for a write-in candidate if you want to write a name in there. A party column ballot is where everything is grouped by party, and so it would say name and then the office that person is running for. Office block tends to be more bipartisan, right? So you're voting by the office as opposed to the party. Party column ballots tend to lead toward more partisanship because it's really easy just to keep checking all of the party candidates. And when that happens, we often see what we call a coattail effect, where smaller unknown candidates tend to get elected on the party column because bigger, well-known candidates in that party get those votes. And when someone votes party column, they typically just vote all of those candidates, and the little candidates that aren't as well-known tend to move on. So there's something to be said for that. Voter fraud is a big deal. There's always a danger that mistakes by voting officials will lead to incorrect data. And this really came to be in the 2000 presidential election in the state of Florida, where it came down to about 200 votes. And really the election process that they had, the ballot that they had was very confusing. People were voting for candidates that they didn't want to be voting for. And the way that they were voting is a punch system, and that punch machine wasn't always punching them effectively, which meant that the ballot counter wasn't counting those punches as well. And so it really depends on, the process. As far as in Wisconsin, I am assuming they're going to keep it this way. I apologize if they don't, but in the last 4 or 5 elections that I voted in, this is what it will look like on your ballot. There will be a name, and then there'll be like a split up arrow. There'll be a box and an arrow, and then the name. And in order to vote for that candidate, you have to fill in the arrow. You have to complete the arrow. And what they're really doing there is trying to make sure that you understand that the arrow that you're filling in, you're voting for that name. One of the problems with the Florida ballot is that it opened like a butterfly, and they had bubbles before the name, but it was confusing. It almost looked like you filled in the bubble after the name to vote for that candidate, but you were essentially voting for the next candidate. And so lots of people were pretty confused. So they do a lot of things like this where you know exactly the one you're voting for, as far as that goes. Oregon does a mail ballot. They send all of their ballots out to voters, and then the voters deposit it in these drop boxes, basically. Some people have really pushed for this, that it allows that ease. You don't have to go on a specific day. You can just drop it off. Something to consider, I suppose. And then finally is the Electoral College. We've talked a lot about the Electoral College, so I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on it. It is important for you to understand how the Electoral College system works. I guarantee you there will be a question somewhere in the AP test about the Electoral College. The Electoral College is made up of delegates. They're the number of House of Representatives members you have, plus the 2 senators. So it's the number of total congressional representatives you have. In the state of Wisconsin, we have 10. Those electors take the majority vote of your state's popular vote, and then they send their votes to that candidate. So for instance, if the state of Wisconsin, the majority of the people of the state of Wisconsin vote for me, all 10 of the electors of Wisconsin go to me as a candidate. There are 538 total electoral votes, and so in order to win a majority, a candidate has to receive more than 270 votes. So that's the magic number that they're looking for. How do we get to 270? Where do we find all of that math to add up to 270? If a candidate doesn't receive more than 270, say there's a third-party candidate and everything gets divided and no one reaches that 270, then the House of Representatives and the Senate gets to decide who becomes president. So this is an interesting graphic. It distorts the United States into what it really looks like in the electoral world. So states like California, Texas, Florida, Illinois, Pennsylvania, New York, they're big states. They're really important states because they have a really high number of electoral votes. States that are normally geographically very large tend to be smaller. So Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, they don't have very much population, and so they don't have many electoral votes. So I'll show you what that looks like in real life. This is the 2012 presidential election results. You're going to notice that when you look at the map, to me, the first thing that stands out is red, which is Mitt Romney. And I think, wow, Mitt Romney must have won this election because he's got a huge swath of the Midwest, the Deep South. But what you'll notice is that he won states that don't have a lot of electoral votes. When Barack Obama won Florida, California, New York, and Pennsylvania, he gained a huge number of electoral votes. And Mitt Romney had to go and get a lot more states just to sort of catch up with him. So really it comes down to math, which is why you'll see that presidential candidates don't go all across the country to campaign. They go to these specific states because that's how they'll get the presidency. There have been so many presidents who've won the popular vote, but they've lost the key states that they need for the Electoral College, and so they don't receive the presidency. So it's really a numbers game. It's really a math game to try and figure out what states they can win to get to that 270. So that is it for this lecture. Tomorrow we're going to do an in-class activity, so you do not have any homework. However, you will want to be studying for your multiple choice and your terms quiz.